Flight, invisibility, super strength. Who among us hasn't wished for a superpower? Well, what if I told you that reef fish have a hidden superpower to help them fight climate change? Climate change is a major threat to reef fish because it hurts their performance behaviorally and physically. Behaviorally, it causes them to become bolder and more active, making them more vulnerable to predation. Physically, it decreases the energy they have for important activities like growing and reproducing. So together, these effects really spell trouble for fish in the future. But what about this superpower? Well, you might have heard of it before. It's called adaptation. And the idea is, we know that climate change is bad for fish on average, but there may be some fish that are better suited to survival in climate change conditions than others. So if those fish survive and pass their good genes on to their offspring, then over time, the population as a whole becomes better suited to survival in climate change conditions. And this process is known as adaptation. Now you might be thinking, this sounds like just the solution we need for fish to fight climate change. Adaptation to the rescue. But just as Superman has kryptonite, adaptation could also have weaknesses. So in my thesis, I set out to investigate whether adaptation might be limited by a trade-off. What do I mean by this? Well, we know that adaptation is going to favor fish that can perform well both behaviorally and physically under climate change conditions. But what if there are no fish like this? What if instead there's a trade-off where fish either perform well behaviorally and suffer physically, or vice versa? That way, when the whole population is going through adaptation, if their behavioral performance gets better on average, their physical performance might get worse. It's like 2 steps forward, 1 step back. So to investigate whether this trade-off exists, I measured how fish behave and perform physically under current day conditions and under future climate change conditions. And what I found was a whole lot of kryptonite. Under current day conditions, I saw no relationship between a fish's behavioral and physical performance. But in the future climate change conditions, I found a trade-off. The fish either performed well behaviorally and suffered physically, or vice versa. So what does this mean for reef fish? Well, we can think of these trade-offs as like a roadblock on the path to survival for these fish, because it's going to slow or constrain adaptation. So that's not to say that it's going to stop adaptation in its tracks. But the climate is changing very quickly, so anything that slows down adaptation means these fish are going to struggle to keep up with climate change. What that means for us humans is that we can't rely on adaptation to save reef fish from climate change. Instead, we need to do our part to reduce carbon emissions, slow climate change, in the hopes that this will allow these fish to survive and thrive in the future. Thank you.